a little bit about, literally in 3 minutes, some of the work that we do. By way of introduction, I want to just say thank you to Telfed Netanya for inviting me to speak to you here this evening. To my hosts in Israel, Charlotte and Dennis Wiener, thank you very much. Doron and I were in school together, we're in the same class. You look a lot younger than I do, you've got a lot more hair on your head. And God bless you, you've got a lot more children. But, so you see, make aliyah, you see what happens to you. Dave as well, thank you Dave. Dave has been a source of strength and chizuk during my relief projects in Zimbabwe, as well as he's a good friend. And thank you for your kind introduction. I also want to acknowledge the presence of my daughter here, Leah, who's traveling with me to Israel. My son became a mfaked yesterday in the Golani unit. So Leah and I traveled to Israel to be at his tekes yesterday. You're all former South Africans, a lot of you from the country communities, from African regions, etc. So I don't know how we're going to deal with this. What I'm going to do is just first of all go around the room. First of all, can you all hear me? Yeah. Okay, it's fine. Okay. Just for your information, that documentary was, as Dave said, was commissioned by SABC. You all remember SABC. It was a 48-minute documentary on the work we do. It was called, what is it called? Shalom, My Beloved Country. It's a follow-up from a previous one called The Traveling Rabbi, and that's hence where I got the nickname The Traveling Rabbi. And they wanted me to wear a black suit and a white shirt and a black tie. They said, you know, it's the tradition our rabbis dress. And I explained to them, what you see is what you get. And the producers weren't all that keen. They wasn't sure how the wider community would react to a casual rabbi, but what you see is what you get. It's the job and the people that we serve that motivates us to continue. And as Dave said, it's a challenging work, so there's no time for dress up. It's in your face reality, so you see it here today, this evening. Let's go around the room quickly. Anybody want to volunteer where they're from?
Clarkston.
Clarkston, right.
Copies.
Copies, okay. Right, Vleestad.
UK, we were the only Jewish family.
Okay, very good. Sorry? Krugersdorp, right. Utenay. What's your surname?
Springs.
Springs, right. Springs. Well, there you go. You see, we've got almost all South African country community here. Yes, lady at the back. Bridor, okay, very good. Okay. What? Württemberg and Windberg. Where? Windberg. Wepener. Wepener, right. Vleestad. Bulawayo. There you go. Nigel, okay. So, just out of interest, a lot of you may have seen, when you saw those tombstones, you asked me about the that's what it's going to look like, ultimately. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a few incidents and not incidents, but a few issues that we've had to deal with, and they're really random because I've been serving the country communities for 18 years. I'm the 7th in line of country communities rabbis. In 1947, Chief Rabbi Louis Rabinovitz wrote an article, you all know him, wrote an article in, it was called in the SA Jewish Times, to say that he saw a crisis in the country communities, that they were dwindling, and that a country communities rabbi needed to be appointed to serve those communities. In those days, there were approximately 40,000 Jews in the country communities. Today, we're about 2,800. Clarksdorp, who's from Clarksdorp? Yeah, right. I mean, you know yourself. What was the community at its peak?
About 250.
250, 230 families. Today, it's 22. Copies, you took them all with you on Aliyah? It's no cloud. Okay, copies. You saw us walking through the Copy Cemetery there. I don't know if you saw that. That cemetery has also been restored. So I'll just go through a few incidents, a few issues that we've dealt with, and then I'll literally open it to the floor, and we can just make it informal. You all know that Oudtshoorn had prior to Cape Town in 1900, 600 Jewish families. Oudtshoorn. The first strong Jewish presence was in 1884, and naturally we know it was the ostrich feather industry that created all the industry. And today there are 18 families in Oudtshoorn left, of which 13 keep strictly kosher homes. We have a shoichet that comes every 6 weeks to shecht for the community. A lot of them are farmers, they bring their own animals, so it's practical and cheaper. So probably out of Yerushalayim, it's probably the highest percentage, 13 out of 18, that keep kosher. Even Johannesburg can't boast that. What's interesting about Oudtshoorn, first of all, in November 2004, we have celebrated the 120th anniversary of the community and of the building of the shul, which you saw me davening over there. Anybody been to that Oudtshoorn shul?
I went to school there.
Okay, there you go. That shul, sorry?
And my family lived there.
Still live there?
Yeah.
What's the surname?
Marcus.
Oh, I did the bat mitzvah of what's the daughter's name? Julia.
Julia.
That's it. So 2004 marked the 120th anniversary of the building of the shul. It is still in existence, and please God, in 2014 we'll have the 130th anniversary. Interesting that the community, first day Rosh Hashanah, don't go out for lunch, they go home straight after shul, and they stay at home. Why? Because in 1900, when you had 600 Jewish families, work that out, 1,200 people plus the kids, they ran the industry, and there were many from people there. As you know, Oudtshoorn was called Yerushalayim de Africa, right? Thank you very much. And what they used to do is the non-Jews used to line the streets on first day Rosh Hashanah as the Jewish people used to walk home, and they used to greet them and bless them. To this day, every Jewish family goes home, and their local non-Jewish friends come to their house, and they bless them and they greet them, and it's still that strong tradition 128 years later. The other large community, we're not going to talk about Johannesburg, Pretoria, Cape Town. Those communities are not in my spectrum yet. PE, we'll get there soon. Durban is on its way. But when I visit some of these larger communities, they say, we're not ready for you yet, we're not ready for you yet. But they ultimately get there. Kimberley, the shul was built in 1901. This year, in August the 9th, we're having the 110th anniversary. It was opened in 1902 of the Kimberley shul. Anybody been to that shul? Beautiful shul, one of the most beautiful shuls in the world. There are 58 resident Jews left in the town, of which none of the men are married to Jewish people, Jewish ladies. Every man is married out. So those of you know that community was a very anglicized community. It was a very, nevertheless, the doors are open, the shul is functioning. And here's a story that some of you may know, some of you may not know. The famous plaque about Oppenheimer's birthday, bar mitzvah. You all know it. It's rubbish, it's bobamaisis, it's not true, it's malicious. And the facts are as follows: that he left Kimberley when he was 11 years old with his father. And members of the Jewish community at one point were quite jealous that he married out of the faith and that he had no affiliation to the Jewish community and he wasn't donating and they couldn't get money from him. So there was this rumor that began that there was a plaque on the wall that commemorated his bar mitzvah. And that years later, when he became such a wealthy man, he wanted that plaque removed. The community wouldn't allow him to. And so he said, I'll buy the whole shul, I'll break it down, I'll rebuild it, but without the plaque. It's rubbish, it's malicious, it's nonsense. The only record of his family or him ever being there is his bris. Is in the register of bris's, Reverend Isaacs. Did the bris, Clarksdorp, somebody said Clarksdorp? Harris Isaacs, his father or grandfather was the Moyle in 1903 or whatever it was, 1910, I'm not sure. And in one of my meetings with Harry Oppenheimer, I had that copy of that bris certificate with his Hebrew name, where the Moyle wrote his Hebrew name, and I had it in my pocket. And I thought, I'm going to nail him, he doesn't know his Hebrew name. And I said to him, tell me, sir, you don't practice Judaism, you do your own thing. Okay, do you remember your Hebrew name? And he said yes, and he said it straight out. No hesitation, no accent, nothing, straight out. So there's a connection. His granddaughter, Victoria, who's the daughter of his daughter, Waddle, what was her surname? Right, okay. Not Nikki's daughter, but Harry, the sister's daughter, has converted to Judaism Orthodox and married a Jewish guy. And I said to him, tell me, sir, what do you feel, how do you know? He said, I'm delighted my family's returning to its roots. So he wasn't such a bad guy. We didn't get all his money, but nevertheless, he wasn't on our top 10 donors. The fact is that his family, and he was delighted that she was learning Hebrew and that she was returning the family to its faith. Swellendam. Anybody been through there, know anything about it? Right, okay. David Schlapperbursky. Anybody know him? Okay, David Schlepperberski is the only Jew living. His uncle, Izzy Schlepperberski, was the mayor, famous mayor of Johannesburg. So he went to live in Swellendam. Swellendam is on the coast, Eastern Cape Coast, Western Cape Coast, sorry, between Riversdale towards Cape Town. And he came into the town and he saw absolute poverty, and he saw the opportunity for these street kids and local people that were unemployed to actually do something to develop the town, increase business, increase job opportunities for themselves. So he created something called Swellendam Alive. He went to the local tourism in Cape Town, Western Cape, and they gave him a budget, and he started, these street kids were sweeping the streets and cleaning it up, and they built guest houses and they furnished them, and the kids were doing bead work for tourists. And it was really, really doing well. Now, interestingly enough, Swellendam had a very right-wing, the fathers of the town were so right-wing that they would never let Jews be buried in the town or worship in the town. So it came Rosh Hashanah, they had to go over the river, out of the town, over the bridge, to the local hotel to have a shul service there. This we talk about over 100 years ago. Today, the local Afrikaners call him an exploiter, and the local coloureds call him Moses, because they appreciate what he does, but yet the local Afrikaners still say that, yeah, there's Jews coming exploiting the town. So that strong legacy from their founders of the town still exists. Nevertheless, he does a sterling job. We know that the Jews' responsibility is to be Or LaGoyim, to be a light unto the nation, and at least to behave in a good way, not to be, if you don't do positive, at least don't behave badly. That gives the Afrikaners and the local neighbours ammunition to talk about you. Mafeking was a Mr. Leviton. Anybody know Mafeking? Anybody been to Mafeking? You all went to Mabatu's son when you weren't allowed to gamble in Johannesburg, right? Everybody said, yes. I won't ask how much money he left behind there. We could have built 2 shuls, right? Mr. Leviton died, and the local Afrikaans guy that looked after the cemetery, Mr. Phillips, knew that any Jew that was married out of the faith had to be buried on the side of the cemetery. So I phoned him up, I said, Leviton has died. He said, fine, and he went and he organised for the grave on the side to be dug. We're wheeling out the body. I'm sorry, this is reality, you all understand what we're talking about. We're wheeling out the body from the house, and his non-Jewish wife comes to me with a checkers packet, and she says, take this with you. I said, what's it? She says, I don't know what it's called, but all the years that we were married, he put it on every single morning. It was a talis and tefillin. So he married out of the faith, never came to shul, never came Yom Kippur, never donated to the IUCF, but he put on talis and tefillin every single day. So I had to convince Mr. Phillips at the cemetery to open a grave in line with everybody else, to bury him next to everybody else, because how many Yidden in Johannesburg don't put on tefillin? How many in Israel don't put on tefillin? Even some of the Frumma don't. So there's the reality. These are some of the challenges that we have to deal with. I have here Petersburg, Wally Levy. My notes say, lived and died for the community, for his community. The life of this man ticked to the spiritual clock of the community into which he had been born and lived throughout his life. This man, the day he was born, his father registered him as a member of the congregation, and he died 2 weeks after the synagogue was closed. There was a valedictory service in which I presided over, and 2 weeks later he died. And that's your dad. A great, great, great Jew. We became very good friends. And how many people's lives tick to the clock of the community? His did. And we remember him at this time. And that's, I always mention him. You should know that. Da'ar, Mr. Radansky, passed away recently. Also owned a shop called Karua Meubelhaus, Karua Furniture Shop. And one of the windows of his shop was painted over with white paint. So I said to him, tell me, I don't understand. And I was once in the furniture business. You have to have display, people have to see. He says, come, I'll show you. Now, Mr. Radansky was married out of the faith. His wife, obviously, his kid, never had anything to do with Yiddishkeit. And he takes me outside the shop and he says, you see that building? He says, that's the shul where I had my bar mitzvah. And it's now the Niva Apostolische Kerk. He says, I can't look at that. So he's painted over his entire window of his shop, because he couldn't stomach, but yet his wife and children, there's no... So we can't judge. I always say to people, and I said it in my acceptance speech at the dinner, where I was awarded the community service in Johannesburg, that it's not for us to judge people's behavior. God will judge them. We have to judge people for their reaction and how they deal with people on the ground. What they do religiously, ultimately God will judge them. Craddock. Right, there's a lady from Craddock, Jean. So the interesting story, there was a Mr. Levinson. You wouldn't have known him, but Cedric knew him. So Mr. Levinson was a hobo, Jewish hobo. And Levinstein was Levinstein, okay. So he was a Jewish hobo, and his brother or his non-Jewish wife, somebody called the Port Elizabeth Chevra Kadisha and said, listen, he's died in Craddock, and we want you to come and bury him and attend to his body. They said, deposit 7,000 rand in the account, and then we'll come and do it. So they went and said, you know what, Gay Gesundheit. They went to the local priest and they buried him in the Jewish cemetery and finished, because he didn't have any money. I was in Uitenhage for Yom Kippur, Uitenhage, right? I was staying at Frida Gordon's house, right? And, you know, during the break on Yom Kippur, so you try and talk about Jewish things, not about Baba Mises. And this story comes up. And Moy was telling me, in fact, he says, this is what happened, and I heard about it in Port Elizabeth Chevra Kadisha, and I've discussed it. You better look into it. And I was fuming, you can imagine. I mean, this business of deposit money in the account will bury you Jewish just doesn't go by us. Anyway, after Yom Kippur, I've contacted the chairman of the Chevra Kadisha, and he said, yes, that's the story. They didn't deposit the money. I said, right. Put together a minion of Chevra Kadisha people from Port Elizabeth. We're driving up to Craddock, and you will ask forgiveness from this man that didn't have a tahara, that wasn't buried by a rabbi, was buried by a priest, because of 7,000 rand. We went, 3 cars, we drove up there, and they asked forgiveness from Mr. Levinstein. Hopefully that gave them all kapora. There are lots of stories that I could tell you about the South African country communities. In Graaff-Reinet, there's the famous plaque to the Smos. You all know about that. In 1986, 85, 86, my department, under my predecessor, through Frank Horwitz, who was the only Jewish mayor of the town, erected a plaque to the entrance of the town on the Aberdeen Road to the Jewish Smos. And it basically said that these people helped to develop the economy of South Africa, and they sold their goods, and they spent dues from the people from various towns as they traveled along. Now we've got to remember that people came to South Africa, and what was the Smos? He had a basket, had no education, or if he had education, had no language, had a bit of money, and they took a horse and a cart if he had extra money, and he went from farm to farm selling their goods. Many farmers had a Smos kamer. You know about that, Smos kamer? They knew the Jew was different. He'd only eat a boiled egg or a boiled potato. He wouldn't eat all the chazarai they ate. So they had it in the Smos kamer, and this guy used to stay there. And at the evening he used to come and say, Lees vir ons, because they knew we were the chosen people. We believed in the Old Testament. Lees vir ons, come and read, pray with us. And so they decided to erect this monument. Unfortunately it was stolen because it was made out of brass. So we've had a new one erected out of granite. How did my involvement come about is Anton Rupert, you all know Rembrandt Group, Anton Rupert, was born in Graaff-Reinet, and he had the entire town of Graaff-Reinet declared a national monument. He paid for every house, the facade to be painted, every street to be retarred. And we had the Oudtshoorn cemetery, which was in very poor condition at the time. And I was quite uncomfortable here. This Afrikaans guy arranged to restore the whole town, and the Jewish community of Johannesburg, whoever was responsible for that cemetery, was in poor condition. So I decided I'm going to call him and chat to him. So I called 1026 or 1023, I don't remember what it was, and got his number in Stellenbosch. You know, when you call these guys, you get a secretary and a PA and another PA, and phone on, I dial, phone answers, and I say, good day, can I speak to Dr. Rupert? He says, speaking. I said, no, I'd like to speak to you. He says, no, it's me. And that's such a fright. I put the phone down. I phoned about 10 minutes later, I composed myself, and I phoned him back. And I said to him, listen, this is who I am, this is what we do. You know that the Ruperts founded the Peace Park in Africa as well, where there's a whole game park without borders. And he was very excited that the Jewish community are interested in restoring and Jewish history and South African Jewish history. So he said, go to my office in Johannesburg and my private jet will bring you down to Cape Town, to Stellenbosch. And I said to him, I'll be down in 2 weeks and I'll come and see you. And we developed a very wonderful friendship that for about 5 years, every Friday, we'd speak to each other for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it was, just general. And when he died, his secretary called me to say that he had died. And he had, one of the people he requested to be at the church service was myself. Unfortunately, as an Orthodox rabbi, I wasn't able to go to the church service. But we developed that kind of a relationship. But what I want to say to you is that we at the Jewish Board of Deputies are very proud of the Jewish contribution to South Africa and the Jewish history. And in fact, through the South African Friends of Beit HaTfutzot, it's a research team of very dedicated ladies. We're issuing publications on the history of the small communities of South Africa. I don't know if any of you have seen it. If you haven't, go onto the internet, order it. There are 5 volumes, there are another 2 coming out. They're for sale in the Telfed office, there you go. It's vital information. If your family features in it, buy a few, because that's what your family, your descendants will have. The next generation. It's a wonderful publication. And that's just the brief history. The major history will still be on the internet, on a full website. I could go on and tell you stories about South Africa and South African country communities. I'll talk briefly about cemeteries, but that's not what I'm here for tonight. To show you the dedication, as you heard, we look after 230 cemeteries comprising of just almost 30,000 graves throughout South Africa. We don't fall under the Chevra Kadisha, we don't fall under anybody. It's a totally self-funded budget through the Jewish Board of Deputies. And this is done through, when communities close, we access the funds of these communities. We establish trust funds, and the interest from that gets used, the capital remains. I don't have a good name in Johannesburg, because when there are communal funds available, I'm there. I'm a big guy and I'm an aggressive guy, because I believe that that's where the country community's money belongs, for the country communities. It's not to support somebody's office or some welfare organization in Johannesburg. It's country community founded, and it's got to remain there. And we've been pretty successful in that, and through that we've been able to run this department pretty successfully. All the more money is better. 2011 alone, due to cemetery vandalism, we spent over 300,000 rand on repairing cemeteries. Now let me make it quite clear that it's not anti-Semitism, it's not blacks, it's not Indians. Indians respect their grave, the Muslims respect their dead as much as we do, and the blacks are scared. You all know they're suspicious, etc. So it's none of that. So let's get that out of their heads. It's not the, the shochs or whatever. It's meshugoyim, it's youngsters, it's drunkards. Who knows what it is? In Lichtenberg we found it. We found the kid. It was 4 14-year-old kids that were high. They got doped up and they ran through the cemetery just pushing around stones. And as they fall, you know, they make this big noise and they smash. And when you're high or you're drunk, it's like you feel like you've achieved something. So it's not. There's never been, except in Bloemfontein, one swastikas were painted on the actual graves. But besides that, there's never been actually signs of. So what we do now is we take the headstones and we lay them flat, as you saw in that video there. It's not literally flat, it's at an angle so the water runs off, it's legible, etc. And we've had to do 11 cemeteries in 2011. Runs into massive money. It is our obligation, we take it seriously, we do it. However, if people have family buried in South African country community cemeteries, it's 950 rand plus VAT, it's not a lot of money. You know, people must understand that they bury their deceased, their parents, their grandparents, their children, whatever it is, and they walk away. I can tell you that there's cemeteries that we look after that I chain up personally. And the only other person with a key is the garden service. And from year to year, not a single person comes to visit. But when it comes to finding out, everybody phones and they're moaning and they're cursing and they're shouting at me. Wah, wah, wah. I say, have you visited? People in Johannesburg. Don't go down to the Eastern Cape, to Umtata, whatever, to even Copies. It's not that far. Their graves there, I can tell you that from year to year, nobody visits. Your brother goes to Oppenheimer, thank you very much. I get a report regularly from him. So what am I saying to you is that it is our responsibility, but people have family buried in the small communities, share the load, contribute to the mitzvah. There are growth areas in South Africa in the country communities. Hermanus, you all know the progress we've done there, very nicely, built a community centre. A lot of what I'm speaking about is on our website, AfricanJewishCongress.com. Don't remember that, not African National Congress, AfricanJewishCongress.com. On the side, there are flags of each country that we're responsible for. Click on the flags, you'll see information. In the middle it says South African Country Communities, you open it there. Down the left side there are various links as well. Spend time, you'll get a good feel of what we're up to. It's all our press releases for the last couple of years. Nelspruit White River has also become a growth area. Now we must just remember that these aren't people coming from out of South Africa and coming into South Africa. These are people moving from Johannesburg, Cape Town, Pretoria, whatever, to these areas called semigration, you see. And they've established what's called the Maputo corridor. Because the Durban port is so busy, they've opened up the Maputo Lorenzo Marx port harbour, and trucks are coming through to Witbank on this big double concrete highway.
Sorry, what did you say?
AfricanJewishCongress.com. Not difficult to work through. And obviously, Plettenberg Bay area is also a growing community. We've built a big shul there, etc. And a few weeks ago, we established something called the Garden Route Jewish Association. Now, you all know your geography of South Africa, from Tsitsikamma through to Plet, through to Mossel Bay, and up to Oudtshoorn. Over 500, and George, over 500 Jews living there. And we've established something called the Garden Route Jewish Association, which is now an affiliate to the Jewish Board of Deputies. They get together twice a year. It's not religious, it's just a Jewish area. They get together twice a year. They report anti-Semitism, we feed them back information, etc. And it's a wonderful area and department and activity that people can feel involved in, not feel religiously pressurized. Talk very briefly about Africa, and then I'll open it to the floor for some questions. Dave mentioned Zimbabwe. I'll just talk about it very briefly. As I said, I'm the rabbi and CEO of the African Jewish Congress, which was established about 16 years ago. We're affiliated to the World Jewish Congress, and our president, Mervyn Smith, is one of the 6 vice presidents of the World Jewish Congress. What we do is we do 2 things. We are involved with maintaining active communities and also involved with relief projects. Active communities are from 6 Jews in Lesotho to 480 in Kenya, to 250, 230 in Zimbabwe left, etc., to 18 in Windhoek, etc. So we move around, and there are activities throughout. Just as Zimbabwe, just to let you know, when things were going belly up in about 2007, I think it was, where you couldn't get food, the shelves were empty, it was just chaos. The African Jewish Congress received funding from the American Jewish Joint, which is the world's Chevra Kadisha. They distribute $1 million a day to Jewish relief. We didn't get almost any of that, but we got enough. And as Dave said, we were sending up, Franklin, you were still there? Lucy? Oh yeah, you left already. Yeah, left already. We were sending up truckloads of food, medication, and not only just luxury food, basic foods. Flour, milk powder. At one stage there wasn't drinking water. We sent 100,000 water purification tablets and bottles of water, containers of water, because you couldn't get drinking water there, the pumps weren't working. Today things are a lot better there, in the sense that the economy is far more improved. Politically it's still a mess, but so we just support people financially, and we send envelopes of cash every month. What else can I tell you? There's a famous story in Namibia, in Swakopmund, the famous tombstone, you all know the story. Walter Geller died in 1939. Wife wasn't Jewish, she buried him. There wasn't a Jewish community any longer there, and she knew she needed to put something Hebrew, something Jewish on his tombstone. So she went into the kitchen cupboard and she found a bottle of wine. The only Hebrew words on it were kosher lepesa. So she handed these Hebrew words to the stonemason, and he engraved Kosher Pesach on this guy's tombstone. It was there from 1939 to the late 1960s, till one of my predecessors, Rabbi Newman, I think it was, decided that it was becoming a tourist attraction. As you see how we react, and it's a natural reaction, nobody's saying anything. He had one photograph taken of it, and then the words were removed. Because people were actually coming there and standing there and laughing at it, and he felt it was disrespectful to the deceased. Telfed Aliyah, I'll tell you a lovely story. I visited the Copper Belt in Zambia, and on one of my visits there was a lady, Martha Painter. Recognize anybody? No? Okay, she used to write a column, anti-Kaunda, called From My Rocking Chair. And she came from Oppenheimer, Eastern Europe somewhere, but she spoke a fluent Hebrew, a fluent Yiddish. She lived in Palestine for a while before she came to South Africa and then on to Zambia. And I said to her, I'd like to do something for you. You organize, etc. And she said to me, she thought she'd set me a challenge that wouldn't work. I'm talking about in the mid-1990s. She says, if you promise me something, if whatever I tell you, you promise you'll do. I said, fine. She said, I want to make Aliyah. So there I stood like Zelig, you can imagine. The fact is, we got her here. And she, so there's nothing is impossible, everything is possible. Mauritius is a whole different story for another time, but I'll open it to the floor. Now, any questions, practical questions? Anybody want to tell a story from der Heim, from the Vrystaat, from the dorp? Go ahead. Anybody want to say something? Sir?
It's an interesting article that appeared, I think, in South African Digest about Jewish graves in Namibia. One of the graves had only Hebrew. It was of someone, a Mr. Lenton.
Sure.
Know that story?
Sure.
He was killed by some hooligans, anti-Semitic hooligans, and they wrote in Hebrew, Nerag al-Kiddush Hashem.
He was carrying jewelry.
Yeah. It's bizarre. Kiddush Hashem of Namibia.
Sure.
It's a little strange, but that is the story.
Sure. And
the man who wrote the story, someone here in Saba, says he was on tour in South Africa with his family. He sat next to a lady, an old lady. I think it might have been the mother of someone in Port Elizabeth. There's a Mrs. Anne Sandwick. She was a Lenten once. And he sat next to this older lady and he said, "Do you know anything about it?" Yes, there's someone in the family. I know that story.
Okay. They were from Keetmanshoop,
Yeah.
the Lentons. There's still a
that's right. There are some young ones now who are in big business.
Correct.
Moshe, tell that story about the Mauritian, the boat.
Okay, I'll conclude with that. Anybody else want to tell anything about their life in small communities?
No, I just mentioned small places like Kinross and Sports. Is there anything ever there that would
Well, Kinross, there's no Jewish cemetery. There's one Jewish lady there, Myers, Ray Myers, lives in Kinross still.
My late father was a doctor.
Okay. Okay. Amersfoort, there is a,
What about Harrison?
Harrismith is just a Jewish cemetery, and the old shul still stands there. Yeah. Amersfoort's got the old cemetery. Rabbi Engel, who was one of my predecessors, his wife came from Amersfoort. She was a Katz. You know? Hannah Katz, that's it. Sorry? Second wife, yeah. Well, we're not counting wives, I'm just Verenigen community also doesn't exist. There's 3 families left, and that entire community center was sold recently. The funds are in Akita.
And we were 80 families when we went, and we left after 5. We were 160 families, and after 5 years when we were left, there were 80.
What was that, in the 80s, late 70s?
81.
Yeah, that's it.
Springs?
Springs also gone, finished.
Germiston as well.
Germiston's got a long time. Long time. Yeah.
From all the communities that you visit, which is fantastic. Are there any queries about making Aliyah?
Not any. Minimal. My good friend Doron Klein has traveled to South Africa with me to many of the small communities, and he's been successful. But it's not a huge. In a small community, it's not a huge. A lot of people are settled there. In Markwood, for example, you saw a lady sitting there looking at a Skype screen. She's the last Jew in Markwood, Yvonne Furman.
She's still there.
She's still there.
Gone.
And she talks to her daughter Cheryl every day on the Skype. Cheryl's in Australia. And
She's married.
she's married for the second time. Yeah. And she's actually arriving on Tuesday. I'm taking her through to Markwood to be with her mother. Yvonne keeps a strictly kosher home. And the community, the local community, look after her. So you get a lot of people that are comfortable, satisfied to stay with her. To move is not easy, even to move to Johannesburg. We now move various country communities people to Pretoria, to the aged home called Jaffa. It's a lot more relaxed than Sandiam Gardens. It's got a country community, country style, you know. It's more so.
What can you tell me about Paul?
Perl, hij werkt nog, Perl. Die kerk nog werkt. Perl. Paul's school still functioning. They got a community. They get a rabbi comes just for Friday nights. They don't seem to have a Shabbos day service anymore. The numbers are small, but they continue. They've got that old cemetery which is well looked after. The new one is well looked after. The Kaufmans are still there. We've got some strong families. Okay, I'll tell you quickly something I wanted to tell you. Talk about Mauritius.
Could I ask you one more question?
Yes, sure.
You mentioned Mervyn Smith.
Yes,
Is he a Cape Townian?
he is.
And he went to Saks?
Correct. Kenya,
Yeah, I
he's a lawyer, my boss.
Is it possible to give me his address afterwards?
Unless you work for the receiver of revenue, I'll give it to you with pleasure. Yes, sure, absolutely, with pleasure. Sure. Yeah, he's a lawyer. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Mauritius story. There's an interesting. Mauritius is one of the countries that we deal with, and the interesting history there is as follows. In 1939, two ships of Jews arrived from Eastern Europe to Palestine, and the passengers were offloaded in Atlit, and the British decided at that stage that they would be declared illegals, so they spent 2 weeks in Atlit. They were then, they protested, they all got naked, and the British beat them into a pulp. Many of them got onto the ship just wrapped in blankets, bleeding, bruised, smashed to smithereens. One ship, in fact, they blew up as they were leaving here. 256 of them died. They themselves blew it up. They didn't realize. They thought they just crippled the boat, but they actually blew it to the extent that it was beyond repair. Ultimately, one ship was loaded. They arrived 17 days later in Mauritius, which was then a British colony, because the seas were too dangerous to send them back to Eastern Europe, and if they would have been sent back, they would have never come out of there. And because geographically the South African Jewish community was the closest, our Jewish board became the link to these Jewish detainees. Now you had 1,650 Jewish detainees arrive in Mauritius. The men and women were kept separate immediately. They were kept under the most barbaric conditions. But they were detainees, not prisoners, so they had a different status. The Mauritians were wonderful to them. The Brits treated them like Zevel. And you had from religious people there to totally secular people, not everybody that came. But because the climate was so intense, or whatever you want to call it, compared to it, you had malaria and you had all the tropical diseases. So people were dying, sometimes there were 5 dying on the same day. During their time there, 127 of them died, and there was a Jewish cemetery established in St. Martin's. Anybody been to Mauritius? Beaubasson. There's a prison called Beaubasson Prison. That's where the Jews were held. And anyway, while they were on the island, the South African Jewish Board was the only link, as I said. And they used to send them supplies from the local Yiddish newspapers to medication, to matzahs, to dental equipment, to whatever they needed. Used to go out of Johannesburg by ship. And there was a lot of relief work, pressure put on the British authorities at the time. And after 3 years, men and women were allowed to once again mix. So husbands and wives never knew if one had died or whatever in the other side of the camp. There was no communication. They were eventually allowed to be together. There was various times that they were kept apart. But the situation improved, their conditions improved. When they left, because the South African Jewish Board was the Jewish community that was their liaison, that cemetery was ceded to us, and we hold the title deeds for that Jewish cemetery. And throughout the years, the Jewish Board had that cemetery maintained. The stones were destroyed through a cyclone. New ones were put up, a wall was put up. Over the years, there's been great progress. A few years after my appointment, the Mauritian government improved the tax laws for people to invest in Mauritius and be involved. So a lot of people at that stage, South Africa had just come into independence, 94. So people were a little bit uncertain. So people were moving their money to Mauritius. There were no questions asked. The conditions were favorable, etc. So all of a sudden there was a Jewish presence on the island. And I was getting calls, is there Armenian, what's happening, etc., etc. So after many visits and quite a bit of activity, we have built a shul in Mauritius, in Currapip. There's a Sefer Torah on the island. I've done a number of weddings of people from off the island, obviously, to do tropical weddings. We are very strong. I have very good relations with the government. Unfortunately, they don't recognize the state of Israel or accept an ambassador because they don't recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And so they won't accept a non-resident ambassador that's based in Jerusalem. So chokhmas, but that's the reality. We have a Jewish prisoner, unfortunately, there for drug trafficking, a man of 76, and we're busy working on it now to have him transferred to Israel. Interestingly enough, the... You're not sure they're going to have him? Yeah, I'll add him to you. I'm not sending him to Knesset, I'm just sending him to a prison here. So, it's a nice Jewish boy, he'll teach you what to do. How did the shul come about out of interest? And I'm going to close because I can see people want to get on with it. Intifada 2, what was it, 2006, 2005, 2004? So somewhere around there. So we met with the president in the morning. I was there for a Yom Ha'atzmaut ceremony. And he said to me, now what happens on the island is the custom is if you have a certain level of credibility politically and communally, you have to pay your respects to State House on every visit. Even if the president doesn't receive you, somebody receives you and they go through the formalities. And I visited Mauritius twice without visiting State House. So I come we meet the president in the morning, who's a Muslim, by the way, and he's now totally off to me. It's as if he's doing us a favor. I had Mervyn Smith with me at the delegation, and I said to the president, what's your story? You know, you've got an attitude, you have a bad breakfast, like what? So he said, no, you've visited my country twice and you haven't paid your respects to State House. I said, well, listen, he wasn't very accommodating, but I thought, I'll get you back, you know, I've worked with you guys before, we'll see how we go take this. Anyway, so we have the meeting and we go through the formalities, and it was actually quite a good meeting. We discussed terrorism, the Middle East, etc. And then I said to him, you know that every religion in your country, you've granted them land for places of worship. Now how about the Jewish community? And he was taken aback, you know. Here he was giving me a mapola for not visiting him, and now I'm asking him for favors. So I said, no, it's a serious issue. We want a place to worship, and I'm making this a formal request to you. He said, put it in writing and I'll come back to you. Needless to say, 6 months later, he did grant us a piece of land. The condition was we build on it within a year, which we've done, and you can look at the website, and there's beautiful pictures and the whole story. The end of the meeting, and I'm closing with this, he said to me, tell me, what are you doing here this time that you've come to visit me? So I said, no, I brought this delegation, and tonight is Israel Independence. And I said, if you have forgiven me, you will be my guest at Israel Independence tonight. And he looked at me and he says, listen, you want me to lose my job? I said, that's your decision. We shook hands, and we had a photo opportunity, and that was the end. I come to the hotel at 6 o'clock to set up, and it is swarming with security. I said, what's going on? They said, the president's coming. They had the sniffer dogs, the metal detectors. At 6:45 he arrived. He stood next to me, we sang Hatikva, and we toasted Mauritius and Israel. And then he turned to me, whispered in my ear, and he says, I must be the only Muslim in the world celebrating Israel independence during Intifada. I said, thank you. We sang Hatikva, and he left. And that's how it works, you know. We're not always successful, but in this case we were very successful. But as I said, it's difficult with Mauritius to get diplomatic ties with Israel, but if anything is ever needed, we deal with it. In fact, today I was with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Bibi Netanyahu is planning a visit to Kenya and Uganda and this really I'm closing. Uganda, there's the famous airport, the Entebbe raid, 1976, 4th of July. And Netanyahu's brother, Yoni, was shot there, and you know, all died in the air on the way back. And we've developed that airport into a museum to depict the history of this famous raid. The question is if Israel could do it again, but we won't discuss that. So now, the meeting today was, among other things, to discuss that I'll be with Bibi at the airport on his visit, literally 10 minutes, to make a haskara for his late brother, and the site and spot. And if you go onto my website, I'm actually standing on the spot where he was shot. So our area, you know, our work is not conventional rabbi work. It runs right across the spectrum. You saw there that we built a library in Bulawayo. We have the most amazing lady there, Ruth Fagenbaum, the sister of Shirley. For many years she wasn't popular. She was part of the Black Sash. Today she's a hero. She went to live in Bulawayo. She married a local guy there. And she saw these thousands of AIDS orphans just walking the streets, and she established an organization called Sagofity. We have a library there now of books donated through Cheryl Furman in Australia, through an organization called Australian Books for African Children. They sent pallets of books up. We've got this library. The kids decided to call it the Rabbi Moshe Library. And 495 kids come every single day to this library. They read the books. They can't take them home because they won't bring them back. They get lunch. They've got chairs. You've got 495 kids not running on the streets when their parents are at work or their grandparents because the parents have died. So that's the kind of things we do. Thank you very much.